Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jennifer Lee Disney, and I'm honored to be here interviewing Tempe Oehler.
Oehler.
Tempe Oehler. Thank you, ma'am, for correcting me. The 1990 winner of the South Carolina Mother of the Year Award. Thank you so much for being here and welcoming us into your home.
Oh, well, thank you for coming to visit, and I'm most happy to welcome you and the group to my home because this has been one of the most exciting things in my life.
Well, we are excited to learn all about you and all about this award. So let's start by asking you, just tell us a little bit about when and where you were born and raised.
Well, I was born in Columbia, South Carolina. My father was a registered civil engineer, and he'd been with the highway department in Columbia, and he came to this part of South Carolina to work on Brook Green Gardens, and so he did a lot of the early surveying in Brook Green. Brook Green and I were launched the same year, 1931, and he and my mother were living at Merle's Inlet. And then she was 42 years old, scared to death to have a baby, and she knew the doctors and hospitals in Columbia, so she wanted to go back there for me to be born. And I was about 3 months old when she came back with me, and then we settled here in Myrtle Beach.
Wonderful. Tell us a little bit about your family and your early childhood experiences.
Well, my father, as I said, was a registered civil engineer. He did a lot of the early surveying of Myrtle Beach, and the map that he did in 1938 was used for the corporate description of the parameters of Myrtle Beach. An attorney had to do the legal end of it, and my father did the surveying end of it. And my mother had been a school teacher. My mother went to women's, I believe it was a state normal college. I told her that college was never normal, but anyhow. And then it became women's college. It was women's college when I went to school there, and when our girls went, it's University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And my father studied engineering at Chapel Hill. At that time, it was in Chapel Hill instead of in Raleigh at North Carolina State Engineering. And my father had been a teacher too because my great-grandfather had established a school in Chocowinity, North Carolina. It was a prep school, and they trained lawyers and doctors and military men. I had my daddy heard my father speak many times about prepping students to take the exams for West Point and the Naval Academy. And so, you know, there were teachers in the family. My father's father was an Episcopal minister. Two of my great-grandfathers were Episcopal ministers. An uncle and a cousin was a bishop. We polluted with the Episcopalians in his family, and my mother's family too. And her father was a horse and buggy doctor in Weldon, North Carolina. They both were North Carolinians. And he had studied at Johns Hopkins Medical School in Baltimore. And when he went, it was the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Baltimore. But then he left them a lot of, when Johns Hopkins died, he left them a lot of money, so they named it for him. Wow. So my grandfather got his medical education there, and what was really interesting is that when they were doing studies of genetic traces in families, they asked him for his records because he would have, he would have treated 3 generations of people. So we were always, happy to hear that. My mother taught before she and my father were married, and then my father nearly died when I was 5 years old of a ruptured ulcer. And my mother went back to teaching, and she was in charge of the lunchroom at the school. And because of that, I got in school when I was 5 years old. The principal said, Miss Hughes, just put her in the classroom. She's here every day. So I finished high school when I was 16 and finished college when I was 20. Wow. And I was active in things growing up that you could be active in then. Now, Myrtle Beach was really a small town then, but you had your church activities and your school activities. And I was in Girl Scouts a short while. The leader got pregnant, so we had to end that experience. And I remember some things very vividly from World War II. My father was an air raid warden, and when the siren would go off, he'd put on his warden's hat and go do whatever he had to do. But I have seen gunfire battles off this coast between the German submarines and the American oil tankers. And then after that, we would get tar washed up on the seashore. And I can remember one February, I got some of that tar on my feet and couldn't get it off. It just had to wear off. It took about a year for it to wear off. We didn't have miracle things in to get rid of it. But we had to have blinds drawn it all the time. You could not smoke a cigarette because the ships could see a cigarette. I remember the OPA bills and little coupons that we had to get our food. And at that time, I worked at the Delta drugstore, which was next to Chapin Company, a grocery store. And I always heard when the ration items came in, the butter and the sugar, the lard, even shoes, whatever. And so I'd just get on the phone and call my mother, because if you didn't get down and get it right away, it wasn't there very long. So I remember those, but I had a happy childhood here. It wasn't glamorous and didn't have all the video things that young people have today, but we used our imaginations a lot to entertain ourselves. And so those were a lot of the things I did at that point.
Well, that's wonderful. It sounds like a great childhood.
Well, it was, and I attended the Myrtle Beach school system, for the 1st grade through the 11th grade. I was honored to be the valedictorian, and I went on to, as I say, Women's College, University of North Carolina, and I was honored to be elected to Phi Beta Kappa there, so I was real thrilled about that. And also the Golden Chain Leadership and Scholarship Society, because I was very active in things there. I majored in Spanish. My degree is in Spanish, but I really majored in the student newspaper. That's where I spent all my time. And we did not have journalism courses, so I learned that from the University of Hard Knocks. And we did have a news bureau chief for the college who did stories, and one of my self-help jobs was to work with him, and he taught me a lot about newspaper. That was the most formal education I had about journalism, but I just loved it.
That's wonderful. You predicted my next question. I was going to ask you to tell us about your education, your young adult life, and when you think back to that time in college and working on the newspaper, what do you remember were your dreams, goals, and aspirations?
Well, from the time I was a little girl, and I don't know how I got started, I wanted to be a mama. I wanted to have a bunch of little children to love and children to love me. I just wanted to be a mother. So I think it was, in a way, it was a prophecy and ironic, that I got to be the South Carolina Mother of the Year for 1990. And I thought about, we didn't have Spanish in our school system. We had French and at one time Latin, but my mother, who was a teacher and was very progressive in ideas, decided we needed a Spanish course and I needed to study Spanish. So she taught the school board into getting a Spanish professor. So I studied Spanish the years I was in high school, and then went on to college, and as I say, got my degree in it, studied it for 4 years, several different courses sometimes at a time. And I did have some dreams about being an international correspondent or working in international relations, but that got kind of expired along the way. And when I finished college, or my senior year, I was offered a scholarship to Yale University. They were starting a new educational program, which to me makes perfect sense. I don't know why people don't think about it all the time, to show how everything is related from A to Z. Everything is related, and that's what the course was about. And I also was offered a teaching fellowship at our university in French. But I turned both of them down because I owed $600 for my education, and it looked like $1 million for me to have to pay off.
Wow.
So what do? Instead of getting a master's degree and a PhD, I got married and had children every 2 years for a while.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you met your husband.
Oh, that is a real story. One of my jobs, I've had many careers in my lifetime, and the first job I ever had when I was 13 years old, there was no labor law enforcement then, was working at Max 5 and 10, and I stopped the counters, and I'd love would just sit on the floor and hide from the manager and stop the counters. But anyhow, I was familiar with Max 5 and 10, and so when I was in college, my roommate and I, that was our shopping emporium. Max was almost up there with Woolworth. And there was a little shopping center near the college, and that's where our finances extended. So we saw this young man in there, and my roommates, we were trying to figure out whether he was married or not. And then we saw that he was wearing a University of North Carolina ring, so I figured out where he'd gone to school. And then she came home one day. She was a student teacher. She said, "I know where that man lives." I said, "Where?" "Well, he lives just 2 or 3 houses from the shopping center. He rooms and boards with his family, and he's not married." She had gone to one of her students' birthday parties, and Fred came in while they were having the birthday party. At that time, I didn't know his name, but I had come home and asked the cashier for the Mac here if she knew the manager of that Mac store. She said, "Yeah, I know him." Said he worked here for 6 weeks as an assistant training. And she told me his name. Well, I never would have remembered Fred Oehler, especially Oehler being spelled Oehler. So one day when I went back, I figured out, well, first, I walked up to him in the store one day and says, "Pardon me, is your name George?" He said, "Hell no, it's not George." And I was so flustered, I thought, this young man thinks I'm trying to pick him up, and I am. And he said there were a group of them who got together every night for their social hour, and one of the men was named George, and he was always pulling tricks on him. So he thought that somebody was pulling a trick on him. Fred was pulling tricks on George, too. So then we talked a little bit, and then one time I went in and bought a 25-cent spool of thread. Now that spool of thread was about this big. Back then it was a huge spool of thread, and that was to show him I was the domestic type. And he said, "I don't think you ever use that spool of thread." And then I figured out when he went to lunch, because my boss sent me down in her car to mail out mail from the alumni office. Oh, I was assistant to the alumni director when after I came home and worked one summer with the Myrtle Beach Sun, and then they offered me a job to come back. So I figured out his schedule, and one day he's walking by, and I just said, "Hello, Fred," and he said, "Well, hello," and he came over and started talking to me, and he said, "Would you like to go to a movie?" And I said, "Well, I'm a good Episcopalian and I've given up movies for Lent." "Well, would you like to go dancing?" I said, "I've given up dancing too." He said, "Well, have you given up eating too?" I said, "No, I can go eat." So he asked me out for a date on March the 7th, 1952. I remember the date, and when he asked me, my mind, that was intellectual, I wouldn't say it was a pity pat heart thing. My mind said to me, this is the man I'm going to marry. And I always was very comfortable with him. So we went out to this southern diner and had dinner, and they used to take streetcars and make diners out of them. And for 2 hours, I let him talk. I found out everything I want to know about his family and everything. You know, I just did a real interview. And then his mother and his sister had gone to the college, so I just went and checked their, historical background in their alumni records. And Fred said that was the only time I ever let him speak 2 hours straight. And so then we dated from March until when he asked me to marry him. He was smoking cigarettes, and he used those little folding matchbooks. And he went and parked by the edge of this golf course, and this is where I dated a golfer he really was a baseball player, but he was trying to teach me how to play golf there. But anyhow, Fred takes that matchbook and taps around the steering wheel, and he says, "I always said that I was going to marry a girl who could sing like a canary, and you can't even carry a tune." Well, it made me so mad, I decided, well, I'm not going to say yes right now. So that was probably in May, so in July, around July 4th, I was visiting my family, and I sent him a telegram, and I said, "Will next June be okay?" Well, he was so excited, he got in the car and drove down from Greensboro. Well, he kept badgering me about moving up the date, and I said, "No, I want to pay my education bill." He said, "You making money more important than love." I mean, just the real line. And so we ended up getting married on December the 27th that year, 1952. But I would never do that again, because you're going to miss out on an anniversary gift or a Christmas gift one. So, and we were married 59 years when he died, and he died on March the 7th, 2012. 60 days after he'd asked me for the first date.
60 years to
60
the day
years,
of
60
your
years
first
to the day.
anniversary. Wow.
60 years to the day. Yeah, it took me a couple of days to realize that, because my little great-granddaughter was born 2 months premature, 3 days later, and then 8 to 10 days later, my sister died suddenly, so I had 3 extreme experiences of life right close together there.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but we had a long, happy life together, and we did things together, and we'd have hamburger dates, just with you and me, even when the children were small. We would get a babysitter to come, and we'd go off for a weekend. I'm a great believer in keeping romance in marriage. And we, as I say, we just worked on that. We were very active in the church together.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. What a great story, and a good lesson for all the future generations of women that are going to hear this. Keep romance in marriage, even with young children. That's important.
One of our assistant pastors at the church, she said, "Tempe, you were stalking Fred." I said, "Well, I never thought of it that way, but I guess I was."
Tell us about the birth of your children.
Oh, that was just a wonderful experience. Of course, the happiest day of my life was the day Fred and I got married. And then the next happiest day was when each one of our children was born, because to me, rearing children was a sacred trust. And I just felt like each one was a gift from God. And somebody told me, well, said, "Isn't that kind of heavy?" I said, "Well, I don't know whether it's heavy or not, but that's what I believed and that's what I lived by." But Tian was, of course, born first. I used to tell everybody she's the oldest child, and she said, "Mama, don't tell people that." And so she was born in 1954. We'd been married 2 years. Then our son was born in Fritz. He's Henry Frederick Oehler III. He was born on in 1956. And then our daughter Cynthia Margaret Oehler Jellin was born in 1958, and then we had about a 4-year rest, and our youngest daughter, Teresa Camille Oehler Bondi, was born in 1962. And it almost was like having two separate families, just that 4 years difference, because by the time she came along and got in middle school, the other 3 children were away from home and going to college, and then they started, their professions. And so she was an only child for a while, which she thoroughly enjoyed. But when I was going to tell you about my careers, I worked, as I told you, at Max 5 and 10. In the summer when I was going to college, I was a cashier at our theater. First I started out as an usher, and and on Saturdays we had a terrible time. It was double westerns on Saturday afternoon, so that was wonderful babysitting time. All the mamas brought their little children to the movie because they knew they'd be safe there, but they all brought their cap pistols. Well, there were adults there who wanted to see the movies, and they didn't like the cap pistols, so I had to institute a program of having a box and having them all check in the guns when they went into the movie. And then I worked at an automobile agency in the mornings, and that lady had trained at Winthrop. She had a degree in business of commerce, whichever it was called then, and she trained me to be a bookkeeper, which was just wonderful. I didn't have to go to school. Elsie taught me, and so I really enjoyed that. Then I did those things, and I worked for the city of Myrtle Beach one summer, two summers, I guess, in the water department. And then when I finished college, the first summer I came back and worked for the Myrtle Beach Sun, which was just starting out. We already had a paper here called the Myrtle Beach News. Well, I celebrated the first birthday with the Sun, and then, as I mentioned, the university called me back to work there. And later the Sun News combined, and now our newspaper is the Sun News. But then after Fred and I got married, when we came back here to live, we lived in North Carolina 2 years after we were married in Raleigh. And Fred was an outdoor paper salesman for a Dillard Paper Company, and I worked as a technician, quote unquote, in the North Carolina School of Engineering at North Carolina State University. What I did was write articles about what our professors did. I wrote one little pamphlet, a magazine that went all over the world. I didn't write it, I edited. The professors would write their treatises and put them in there. And then I just did different kind of newspaper work things. The stories I wrote went through the news bureau of the college, but I just really enjoyed that work. And little did I know then that some time later our son would be graduating in chemical engineering from that school.
Wow.
But he did. And but I really enjoyed when I came back in, worked at first after we were married at the Chamber of Commerce. I love that work. I set up a news bureau there, and we sent out stories about Myrtle Beach, and this was just a year after Hazel. And Hazel had done a lot of damage, but it also put Myrtle Beach on the map because it tore down a lot of old properties that needed to go. And so it got to the point, though, I had to call up the state editors and tell them to quit sending their neophyte reporters down here because if they saw high tide, they thought we were having a hurricane, and we weren't. And, of course, the motel operators didn't like that one bit, you know. But that's, and I worked one year there with the Sun Fun Festival, Miss South Carolina pageant, the year that Marilyn
Marion
McKnight became Miss South Carolina, and that was a great joy to work with that. And so the next time I worked at the Chamber of Commerce until our son, who was our second child, was 3 months old, and I couldn't be a full-time mama and do a full-time career at the same time. So I resigned, and I stayed at home until our fourth child was in middle school. By that time, we had 3 children in college, and that is a powerful motivator to put you back to work. And so then I went back to substitute teaching, but I was on call all the time. You know, I could get a lot of days teaching, and the students would say, "Oh, please don't get Miss Oehler, please don't get Miss Oehler," because Miss Oehler was going to make them behave and be quiet and do their work. And so. But I enjoyed that. I've enjoyed every job I ever had except for writing sports stories. Now, I just was not cut out for that. And I worked for Myrtle Beach Sun. I had to write sports stories. And they didn't have those books, you know, football for dummies back then. So that was a real challenge for me. But, and then our children were involved in school activity, first in church. I wanted them to find their way to the Lord. They're first involved in church and school activities, scouting activities, and we went to everybody's activities. Everybody in the family did, and to make us, you know, have togetherness as a family. And so you just had to go. If Fritz was having something, all the girls had to go. If the girls had something, Fritz and all the other girls had to go. Also, we stressed having family dinner every night, and I was really interested when Fritz was taking psychology in high school. His psychology professor asked him how many had a family meal once a day. And Fritz was the only student in the class who had a family meal once a day.
Wow.
And that was just amazing to me. And then we had board meetings at this house. We sat around the dining room table in there, and Fred was the president and the chair, rather than I was the vice chair. And the others had votes, but we had the veto vote. But we discussed current events and family finances, and this was to teach them to manage their money, help teach them to manage their money. And so we would just have our little board meetings and have a good time and discuss things, you know. Of course, the children didn't get that way too much. But
well, I'm a political scientist, so I love that you were kind of modeling decision making, collective decision making, but also power, because not everyone has equal power around,
absolutely.
around the table.
And it has trained them all to do that kind of thing.
That's wonderful.
And so we, but we were, you know, a close family, and we had just one car, and that was really a challenge when they got to be teenagers, even in college. But it sure did promote togetherness too. And so we had. I grew up in where there was a lot of love in the family. There wasn't much money, and the money was just kind of meager. But there was a lot of love, and with both my parents having been taught, they tutored me at home, and they wanted me to get an education, and my sister too. And of course, Fred and I wanted it for our children, and they all got their degrees, and they they got scholarships. They worked, they borrowed money. And of course, we helped them too. But they were paying out-of-state tuition, which was expensive, and we never could have done it for them, you know, if it hadn't been a combined family enterprise. So that was the big thing, was to get them educated. Tian said, "Mama, I remember one time you wore one coat a long time." I said, "Yeah, your education was more important to me than having a new coat." So we had, we were very frugal in the way we lived to be able to do this too. And we bought this house. It was an upstairs, downstairs duplex. So we lived upstairs and rented the downstairs, and to help make the payments. And then we had one room in the back, and we added 2 rooms and made a little rental cottage, and we rented that in the summertime. And I was, of course, we were joint owners, but I was the owner manager of that rental property. I did a lot of cleaning, and I told the children I would scrub floors for them to go to college. Well, guess what? I scrubbed floors for them to go to college. Sometimes I'd get on my hands and knees and scrub that kitchen and that bathroom floor. And but again, trying to get an education, trying to help them to develop a good spiritual life for themselves, good morals and good character. Because I told them, I said, anybody can take your money from you, anything else, but they can't take your character and your education from you. You can hold on to that. And
Well said.
so and oh my, I had a prayer hotline to the Lord every day, every hour, every minute, and every second. Because I never said my children wouldn't do that, because I never knew what my children would do or wouldn't do. So I would just, I prayed all the time. I did tell them that if they were dumb enough to end up in jail, I was going to let them sit there and serve the time, and I was not going and bail them out. And I just prayed that that day would never come, that I'd have to make that decision. But they said it worked. It scared them enough. They decided to try to stay out of jail.
I like that. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah. So we. I'm trying to hit some of the
You're hitting
highlights.
all the highlights. Do you want to tell us about what your children are doing today, and if you have any grandchildren?
Yes, and I'll tell you about my children, their degrees. Tian has a MSW in social work. She went to UNCG undergraduate and Chapel Hill graduate, and she is a clinical psychologist. She's also an adjunct professor at Overy Georgetown Technical College. And in the past, she has been an expert witness in death penalty trials.
Wow.
She had a wide spectrum of things, so she wouldn't get burnt out as a social worker. And then our son was educated as a chemical engineer, and he did that for a number of years. And then after he got married, he was in Pennsylvania at that time. He and his wife moved to Harrisonburg, Virginia, which had been her home a good period of time. Her father was a Lutheran minister, and he would go to new towns, and build churches. And so they went back there, and Fritz operates, they own an apartment building with 5 apartments in it. He's also head of the cytology lab that Susan's mother had. They had to have somebody with a lot of biology to do that. And so he does that. And then Susan is a partner in a patchwork quilt emporium, and he helps with that too. Wow. So he kind of got away from the civil engineering part. But that's what good education's about. You can adapt yourself to other things. And then our daughter Cindy graduated from UNCG with a degree in business, and she has a master's degree from Webster University, and a master's degree in management. And she is a civil service officer, and is at one time, one of her jobs was buying medical supplies for all the military in the United States Army, all over the world. And so she's had some heavy responsibilities like that. And she has 2 daughters. Fritz has 2 sons. Tian has a daughter and a granddaughter. And Tian's daughter is 22, and little Emily Ann is 3. Our grandsons are 16 and 13, and Cindy's daughters are 28 and 25. Wow. And her older granddaughter is graduated from Florida Atlantic University, and she is the manager of a recovery, I don't know whether you call it a hospital or not, but a recovery situation. Mm-hmm. And she worked for them part-time while she was going to college, and then they gave her a full-time job and a wonderful salary, so she's happy there. And then the younger daughter got her degree from in psychology and a minor in business from the University of Texas at San Marcos, and she hadn't opted to get a master's right now. But she is working in a detention center in San Antonio, the residents are from 10 to 17, and she's been promoted rapidly there to management positions. So
And Cindy's husband, Jim.
what, honey?
And Cindy's husband, Jim.
Oh, and our son-in-law Jim is works for the University of Texas Health and Science Center in San Antonio.
Wow.
He's a retired captain from Special Forces, United States Army,
Mm.
and he's just recently gotten his PhD.
Wow.
So that was a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. And Camille's husband, Camille and Greg don't have any children, and she is assistant to the head of the Department of English at the College of Australia in Kuwait.
Wow.
And she's a candidate for a PhD.
Mm.
And her husband works with mainframe computers, and he's had several different jobs there in Kuwait. Let's see, that's Camille. I'm trying to see if I missed anybody here.
Yes, everybody.
What an amazing,
Yeah.
I mean, you
Yeah.
must be so proud
Oh, we
of
are.
your children,
Yeah.
your grandchildren. It's a testament to you and your role as a mother.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, all our children got a master's degree.
Or
And,
higher.
Yeah, and they all of them paid for their own master's degree. So that
That's
was really an
wonderful.
accomplishment, you know. So
Let me
yeah, but
ask-
education has been a big thing.
Let me ask you this. It's clear that education has been important to you, that working has been important to you, and the discipline and the values have been important to you, and what you've instilled in your family. I want to ask you about another concept or word and just see how you define it. What does motherhood mean to you?
Oh, motherhood. Well, you know, I told you that all I wanted to be when I was growing up was a mother. But to me, it's a sacred trust, and as I said previously, each child was a gift of God. It's a very important role, and I feel that the mother sets the model, so to speak, for how the children are going to be and to do. Because, boy, it is a full-time job. I mean, you're a cook, you're a chauffeur, you're a nurse, you're a planner, you're a manager. Everything, you know, that involves children's life, you do that thing. And so it's very important. And I felt like I never considered a sacrifice that I didn't do something else rather to be a mother. You know, that was no problem for me. But being a mother was the first most important thing in my life.
I really appreciate the way you talked through the many jobs that you had, and then you talked through that you were able to stop doing some of those jobs so that you could be a full-time mother from the 3 months old of the first or second born to the
Second.
middle school of the last.
Yes, that's correct.
A lot of women and mothers, I think, struggle with that issue of balance,
Mhm.
balancing the work they're doing, all the roles you just described so eloquently of being a
Mhm.
mother in the home, and then working outside the
Yeah.
home, doing volunteerism, working in their church, having to work to have 2 salaries. Talk a little bit about how you were able to balance those things, and then maybe how younger women today, how you think young women like your daughters are able to balance those things.
I was able to balance it well because when I was doing, well, it was difficult for me when I was manager of the director of the news bureau, because that's when I had to stop when the second child was 3 months old. But the others, when you were a school teacher, you can match your hours to your children, so that worked out very well. And then I did a lot of volunteer night activities, and Fred would babysit, so, you know, I could go do those things. And of course, he had his activities he did too, and I'd be the babysitter, quote unquote, while he was doing that. But, you know, he supported me in doing those things. And I just think the young women today have a terrible challenge because I don't see how they have time to do a full-time profession or career and be a full-time mother too. Now, see, most of those years I was at home for my children when they came home from school. Well, mothers who work to 9 to 5 don't have that luxury, and they don't have the luxury of going to their children's activities, you know, participating in that. The Girl Scout movement slowed down when women started working because there were not enough volunteer mothers to be scout leaders. And So it's an amazing challenge, I think, to young women today, or mothers of any age who are trying to balance a career and work at the same time.
You mentioned your husband helping out when you left for evening activities. Do you think that it seems to me in conducting all these interviews across the state with Mothers of the Year and committee members, that having a supportive partner is one of the most important ways that women can try to balance that work inside the home and that work outside
Absolutely.
the home. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, because we didn't have babysitters that much back, when our children were small. Now they became babysitters, but we didn't have babysitters that much. And then it was an economic thing too, because we were always conscious of saving money for their education, But absolutely, I could not have done it if my husband hadn't been there to help me. He said that I got the South Carolina Mother of the Year title, that I could not have done it without him. And then the children told me I got it because of them. And there's just always somebody around to put you in your place, and make you humble.
Well, that's a beautiful segue to my next question, which is, how did it feel to be named the 1990 South Carolina Mother of the Year?
I was so thrilled. I didn't know what to do. I just couldn't believe it. And this was going on while I think I was writing my part of the application when Hurricane Hugo was going on. And during Hurricane Hugo, I was the CNN representative from Myrtle Beach. A young lady across the street had worked for CNN a number of years, and she called me and told me they couldn't get a crew in here and the hurricane might hit here. Would I speak for them? I said, I'd be happy to. So 5 minutes before the broadcast, they'd call me and do a voice test, and then they would call and ask me to tell them what was going on. So I could tell them when the lights went off and how I thought the wind was and things like that.
Wow.
And at 12 o'clock, I looked out my upstairs window and I saw two young men heading to the beach with surfboards to get that wonderful surf with this terrible hurricane going on. And later, I was out at Coastal Carolina University making a talk about the Ocean Forest Hotel. Several of us were. And one of my former students said, Miss Oehler, that was me going down your street. I said, well, Andrew, if I had known it, I would have gone out there and gotten you and pulled you to safety. Because he survived it. He was in college then. But that was exciting to, to be the word person. And then they finally told me they wouldn't need to call me anymore. It had hit. And I said, where did it hit? And they told me McClellanville. So I knew what was going on. I didn't have a bit of electricity, and I didn't have a radio at that time, because our CNN neighbor came down and she'd tell me, what would you like me to bring? I said, a portable radio and some ice.
Wow. Wow. Tell us a little bit about your experience that year that you were an award winner and that year of service.
Oh,
the governor's
it was
mansion, the state house, all that stuff.
It was just wonderful from beginning to end. They had an interview down at First Presbyterian Church in the fellowship hall, and excuse me. Only one interviewer showed up, because one of our local prominent citizens whom I had taught in school was getting out of jail that day. And so, but he really got the word out as far as a television interview was concerned. And then the newspaper publicity was wonderful. And then that year, every 5 years, I believe, they hold the convention at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. And that was the year for the convention at the Waldorf Astoria. And John McMillan, who I think was on the staff of Governor Carroll Campbell that year, made arrangements for me to have gratis room for Fred and me to have a gratis room at the Waldorf Astoria, which was wonderful.
Wow.
We walked in and there was a bowl of fruit there, and the activities were wonderful. Well, they had told us to pack snacks because sometimes we might be irregular with getting our meals, so I had packed snacks. So Fred and I, let me tell you haven't lived until you eat Vienna sausages and crackers at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. And you know that place has 37 kitchens. Can you believe that?
Wow.
And then, we had the West Point cadets escort us at the formal dinner. We had a lot of good activities to attend. And I remember I saw Saks Fifth Avenue for the first time. It was just like a fairy tale story for me. And I got to meet all those mothers, other mothers too, you know. And then afterwards, and I was telling you about my scrapbook. When I came back, I went all over South Carolina talking about being South Carolina Mother of the Year. And went to Orangeburg and spoke there to a group of mothers who were homeschooling their children. And that was really special. The South Carolina Mother of the Year from Orangeburg had invited me to come, and her husband was a doctor. And so Fred and I went for that, and that was really nice. I spoke to several churches here in Myrtle Beach about the program. And then when I was in the Sun Fund Parade, a former JC friend of my husband's in the JCs made his convertible eligible to me, and I rode down the boulevard, and I was sitting up the back, you know, and it says South Carolina Mother of the Year. All these boys are hanging off the barrel, and it says, "Hi, Mom, hi, Mom." And I says, "Hi, let's hear it for the mothers of America." So, that was exciting. But it just, and so many people, I got so many wonderful letters of congratulations, friends of the children I hadn't heard from in years, and friends I hadn't heard from in years. And so it was, it just gave me maybe a new self-confidence, and I wanted to aspire to be the best mother then that I could be, after this experience. But it was just a wonderful experience. And of course, Fred was with me there at the Waldorf Astoria, and T.N. had helped make arrangements for her to go. And our son, I ran across the car the other day, and he says, "Mom, have a wonderful time at the Waldorf. Love, Fritz." And he had sent a bouquet of flowers for it. Yeah,
That's so nice.
And and one of my friends sent 2 orchids, and I already had 2 orchids from the Mother of the Year committee, so I just won all 4 of them.
That's wonderful. You deserved it.
So
Congratulations again on a wonderful award, and certainly well deserved. Raising 4 children, doing all the jobs that you had. 5-minute warning to talk on CNN. I mean, you've contributed a lot to society and to your family.
Yeah, the Lord has really blessed me because I have had such wonderful experiences in life. For about 30 years, I was on the Board of Trustees of South Carolina Hall of Fame, and most of those years, I moderated a student forum before the formal induction of the inductees. We had a deceased inductee and contemporary inductee, and we had high school students from all over Horry County to come. One time we had nearly 1,000, but we'd have 600, and I would speak to them about the contemporary inductee, and that inductee would speak to the students. We'd give them a mic or give the kids a mic, and they could ask questions. And I'll tell you a couple of cute questions. One, Cardinal Bernardine, Cardinal Richard Bernardine. One of the students said, "Cardinal Bernardine, if you have children, would you like for your son to be a cardinal?" He said, "Well, since I'm a priest, I won't be having any children." And another one, Dr. James Edwards, who was head of the medical university, and he was, I believe he was chairman of health, education, and welfare of the United States government. And one little boy, and that little boy looked young to me. I don't know how he got in there. He says, "Governor Edwards, what do you think of adultery in the home?" And I thought, oh my goodness, what's Jim going to say to this? He says, "I don't think a thing about it being in the home anyplace else." Next question. And so, he just carried that. And the children loved Dizzy Gillespie. He had been on, I hate to mention this maybe, he had been on Bob Cosby's show not long before that. And all the kids wanted to come see Dizzy Gillespie, and of course he was such a wonderful trumpet player. But General Westmoreland was one of the best people I ever worked with. It was that military discipline, I guess, except for one thing. We would close the doors for the student forum part, and then the people had to wait till they opened to come in. But a couple of his longtime friends just followed him right in. Well, he's following them down to the front of the auditorium, and I said, "General, we don't go that way, we go this way." only time in my life that I could order a 4-star general around.
That's a great story. I love that you
Yeah.
shared that.
I liked him, you know, and he wanted to know everything that was going on, and he followed it to the T. I just got to meet so many wonderful people in that work, you know, in that field. James Towns, who Charles Towns, who developed the laser. He was the first one. We started having those forums, and I thought kids didn't have heroes back then, and I thought, what a waste. You have these men and women who are really heroes, and the kids need to have heroes. So why don't we bring in the school children? So that's what we did, and so I get the school teacher in me, and then I had worked with forums in college too, so that format was very familiar to me. But that has been an exciting part of my life. I served for 30 years on the Horry County Board of Architectural Review. That's the preservation of history in Horry County, and I really enjoyed that.
You have done so many activities. I mean, you've mentioned so many things in terms of employment, civic, giving back to church.
Yeah.
Are there any other activities that you want to mention that you haven't yet mentioned? Things that
Well,
you've been
let's see.
involved
Well,
with?
I belong to about 9 historical organizations. I belong to National Trust of Historic Preservation, and I'm a graduate of their Preservation Leadership Training Program. I went to Asheville, North Carolina, won summer for that. I belong to the colonial dames of the 17th century, and because of that, I belong to the colonial dames of the state of South Carolina, and my local chapter, which is in Florence. I was the state historian for the colonial dames at one point there. Fred and I belong to the South Carolina Historical Society. I'm trying to think. I belong to Horry County Historical Society, and I served on that board. I was secretary when we wrote the charter for the Horry County Historical Society, and that just thrilled me to death to be able to do that. So, you know, I just love history. All my family did. My mother loved history. My mother loved politics. Her daddy had served in the legislature of North Carolina, but my daddy's family were teachers and historians, and they just really loved it. I guess it was kind of in my veins, you know. And you know, I just volunteered for all kind of things. I was just a constant, compulsive volunteer, I guess.
Let me ask you this. Do you think women's work and women's roles as mothers are adequately recognized by society?
Oh, by no means. By no means. Well, men mainly don't recognize the value of motherhood and all the work that women put into being wives and mothers. I never will forget, we went to one of my husband's Army reunions in Southern Pines, North Carolina. And one man whom we'd met and eaten with him and his wife several times there, and his wife had died the preceding year. And he said, I just never realized how much she did. And I thought, that's not good, you know. And of course, our son, I trained like our girls did to do everything there was around the house. Well, I tried to pair them off together to do chores, and that didn't work. So then they each had a week to do something. And our son says he makes the best potato salad in the world, but none of us have ever tasted that. But yeah, I don't think women get the recognition for what they do. And then if they are a career woman or a professional woman too, and a mother and real children, I don't think they get the recognition for that either.
Let me ask you this question. What does feminism mean to you?
Well, feminism to me, it means to me people getting up and really speaking loudly about being feminist. And that has never been a problem for me because my father was very broad-minded. I guess my mother was a feminist. I never thought of her that way, but she was a college-educated woman. And so, and my mother was free to do what she wanted to do, and I was free to do what I wanted to do to the best of my ability. And then my husband, his mother was a college graduate and a teacher, and she was a feminist in her own way too, but not getting up, you know, speaking and everything. And she did what she wanted to do because she did a lot of things. She took piano and art and a lot of things after she was married. And Fred never put any parameters on my doing what I wanted to do, you know. And I always wanted to fight for right and the underdog. I just for what was right, I've tried to stand up for that. I haven't always done what I could do, but you know, I have tried and have not always done what I wanted to do. But that was, you know, and I've tried to teach my daughters that too. And poor Fred and Fritz, they kind of had a hard time. They were surrounded by 4, I guess, power women.
I'm the youngest of 3 daughters, so we say the same thing about my dad.
Yeah.
My poor dad with 4 power women around him his whole life.
And I had one grandmother, the mother of my doctor granddaddy. Oh man, Grandma Cook, she was a pistol. She married her husband, and they moved to the state of Tennessee and got a share of land. And they were only married 6 years, and he died out in Tennessee. She had 2 little boys to rear. So she moved back to North Carolina, and she became the postmaster in Warrenton, North Carolina. Now, the fact that her father was a Superior Court judge had nothing to do with her getting that job, I'm sure. But she would even turn down the postmaster general who came to inspect the post office one day because she didn't think he had his proper credentials, and she wouldn't let him behind the counter. But Grandma Green she'd send money from her to my grandmother, who was her son's wife, by one of her daughters, and she'd sew the money in the hem of her skirt and put on the train and send her back with some money. and Grandma Green was just a very innovative lady, and she was way ahead of her time. And she has some very innovative daughters and granddaughters, I'll tell you, and great-granddaughters. Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Well, I never considered myself a feminist. But Ashby Ward, whom I love dearly, him and his wife, he was the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce here. He also taught our Sunday school class. And one day we got on the subject of feminists, and I said, I'm not a feminist. And Ashby says, oh, Tempe, you are the greatest feminist I've ever seen. So somehow it oozed out. I didn't realize it.
I think hearing you talk about generations of powerful women in your family who are innovators, who were not curtailed in their freedom and their choices and wanting equality for your sons and daughters inside and outside the home, you sure sound like a feminist to me.
Well, the men were powerful too, because here we have doctors and lawyers and preachers and teachers and men who serve in government, and so you know so they let their wives have freedom too. So it wasn't just the women all by themselves fighting for that role subtly, however.
Absolutely. I think I have one son. I imagine parents who have sons and daughters would want their sons and daughters to have the same opportunities to make choices, whatever those choices might be.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that's one
I always
measure.
told my children that they could be whatever they wanted to be, as long as it was honest. So even digging a ditch or whatever, as long as it was honest work, you know, they had the opportunity to go higher if they wanted to. And so well, all 3 of our daughters are power women. Tian is in her profession, and Cindy is in her profession in the civil service regimen, and that she says it's very competitive, and that's a hard world to live in. But she's lived in it, thrived in it. Tian's lived in her world and thrived in it, and Camille has, because she is in a Kuwaiti university. Kuwaiti setting. It's an Australian university, but it's a Kuwaiti setting. The Kuwaitis own that university, and she was when she first went to Kuwait, she taught their sky watchers, who are like our special forces and Navy SEALs, and no woman had ever had that position before. So you know they.
It sounds like you raised your children well.
Well, I
To
hope so.
thrive even in male-dominated spheres.
With the Lord's help. You know, I give the credit to the Lord, because boy, I couldn't have done it without Him right by my side
That's beautiful.
all the time.
Let me ask you this: do you have any questions for us?
Yes, I think you partly answered it. I wanted to know what you will do with the video.
It is our goal to get these videos. We're going to transcribe the interviews, and then we're going to put the videos up available online so that you could go to Winthrop University, then click on the Louise Pettis Archives, and then within the archives, South Carolina Mother of the Year Award, Archives, Oral History Project, and then have each woman's name who we have interviewed. So you could click on, you and your family could click on and see your interview. You could watch all the other videos of the other mothers and other committee members. When it's all said and done, we'll have about 30 interviews, including Mothers
my.
of the Year and committee members.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Oh, and the committee members, let me sing their praises. They have been so wonderful throughout the time that I first was nominated. You know, I still hear from Peggy Kenny. She calls me once in a while. And I was hearing from Ann Edwards until Jim died. And Sarah, I'm trying to think of the lady in Orangeburg, Mary Carolyn. Well, I'll look up her name.
Carolyn
in a minute.
Watson?
Yes, she's been wonderful to me, and she's the one who invited me over to speak to her group. And how is she doing? I haven't heard from her lately.
We were able to interview her. She's doing great. I mean, this has been an amazing treat for me and such an honor to learn the history of all these amazing women. And we want this to be a conversation, intergenerational conversation, so younger women at Winthrop University and men can learn about the history of the great Mothers of the Year and the great women in the state of South Carolina. So we cannot thank you enough for participating in this project.
Oh, well, it's my honor to participate, and I was just so honored to be chosen as the Mother of the Year. And I will have to tell you, one of our South Carolina Hall of Fame meetings, Governor Robert McNair was being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And his wife was there, Josephine, and Ann Edwards were there. And I stood up and said, the last time I saw Ann Edwards and Josephine McNair was when they were nominating me to be the South Carolina Mother of the Year. And I had taken a cypress knee that Dr. Archibald Rutledge, who was a port laureate of South Carolina for 40 years, had given me. He cut it out of Hellhole Swamp, and I held it up and to exhibit it, show and tell. And Governor McNair said, well, Tempe, if I'd known that you wanted some of those cypress knees for Hellhole Swamp, I could have brought you a whole bunch of them. So, but just such wonderful people. You know, the very few, that almost none that I can think of who were not top-notch people. And Charles Towns, who developed the laser, he said sitting on a park bench in Washington. I said, what do you see as the future for the laser? He said, well, if it's used for medicine, good things, I'd be happy, but I'm afraid of the bad things that people will do with it. You know, just all of them philosophers. Several of them are governors of South Carolina. And Mary Cloud Bethune was inducted. And we had to do her posthumously. She died just before for her to be inducted. And the rule in the South Carolina Hall of Fame is that a person has to be dead 10 years to be inducted as a deceased person. But she'd already been elected, so we decided to go ahead and do it. And Julian Bond did a tribute to her. He came, to the Hall of Fame and did a tribute. And Governor Riley of Charleston, I'm a great admirer of Governor Riley. He was coming to do a tribute for one of our deceased inductees who was a poet from Charleston. And he walked in the door and I introduced myself and I said, I will be standing beside you. May I help you? And he said, yeah, I need a quiet little cubbyhole to go write a speech. So I found him his quiet little cubbyhole to go find a speech. But you know, the Lord has just blessed me with being able to meet and learn from these world famous people. You know, it's just wonderful.
What a set of experiences, and your life is a model for what younger women can learn from and try to emulate, and motherhood coming first, but also kind of weaving in and wrapping in all these wonderful lessons, commitment to education and hard work, and it's just been an honor. An honor to sit with you. Do you have any final thoughts or advice you
Well,
want to leave our young women
one
with?
thing that the children remind me of, and especially T. Ann, is I always said that I thought the school system got corrupted when they took the Lord's Prayer out of it. Now, I'm going to run into a lot of opposition for a lot of people who don't want the Lord's Prayer in the school system. But starting the day with the Pledge of Allegiance and the Lord's Prayer set the tone for the day. And I just felt that that was a good way for students and young people, to start a day. I just, I'm sorry that happened. I wish we could change that. And maybe, I don't know, I see some swinging back, so it could happen. But,
Thank you. That's it. It's important. I think if there's one theme I've seen is faith and family that's run through all of these interviews. So
oh, really? Yeah.
absolutely.
Well,
faith,
you can't,
family, and feminism. It's been an interesting.
No,
mix.
three, yeah.
All three.
You can't do it without the Lord. And, the choices facing young women today, I'd like to ask this, and the problems facing them are equal pay for equal work. I don't think women get equal pay for equal work. I think that should be instituted. Domestic violence just breaks my heart. And I'm glad to see that South Carolina is moving towards more penalties for that. It's just bad for us to be bottom of the totem pole with the women killed in domestic violence in the state of South Carolina. That just really concerns me and upsets me. I think a proper child care for children while the mothers are working is a big problem. And I just applaud the companies who have had child care facilities, on their in their work atmosphere for mothers to be able to work and have their children nearby. I just think that's a wonderful thing.
I'm so glad you brought us back to that, because I intended to ask you what you think are the most important issues facing women today. You just touched on three of the most important in terms of domestic violence,
Yeah.
equal pay, and child care.
Yes. Thank you. But
Healthcare.
what?
Are there any other issues you would like to speak about
Healthcare.
facing women
Oh,
today?
healthcare. Healthcare is a tremendous issue. Because I'm geriatric, it's a tremendous issue for me. And I can see it being, as I'm watching what's happening, I can see it being a tremendous challenge for young people, middle-aged people, for everybody. And I know when we visited Germany, I noticed there weren't any homeless people anywhere. And I commented on that, and they said, well, the Germans don't let their people become homeless. They have health care for them, and they have a place for them to live. And I thought that was wonderful. And then I've been out to Seattle, Washington, and every other step is a homeless person, which I think Seattle has the largest homeless population in the world. So health care and taking care of our citizens is immensely important as a problem. And the international situation, oh my goodness, the Mideast and all the terrible things that go on there, and with having to send our warriors over there, men and women, this is a tremendous problem we're going to have to deal with for a long time, because a lot of this fight is over that oil that's over there in the Mideast. And I can remember my father telling me that when I was a child. He said, oil's going to be our undoing. So it just concerns me. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Ukraine, Russia, China, any of those nations, and what'll happen from an economic standpoint. Looks what happened in Greece right now. I think they're about to get themselves shored up for a while. But now, when a country goes bankrupt, it could be the whole world system, because we are so closely interwoven and intertwined, in our economic survival and participation.
Well said. This woman has domestic and international expertise beyond compare. Thank you so much, Tempe Oehler. It's been an honor to meet you and interview you, and really appreciate you welcoming us into your home.
Oh, well, we're happy to have you here.